Okay, great. Well, once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining me. This is the Linda Loring Nature Foundation Science Pub Speaker Series. And tonight I'm very excited. I'm very excited for tonight's speaker. We have Caroline Collatos, the PhD candidate at UMass Boston and the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life at the New England Aquarium. Caroline's going to be talking about her dissertation research focused on sandbar shark presence, residency, and annual habitat use along Nantucket's shoreline. So please help me in welcoming Caroline Collatos. Thanks, Caroline, for being here tonight.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. And if not, you can put something in the chat. But thank you guys so much for joining. I'm very excited to talk to you. And thank you to the foundation for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to share the work that we've been doing and I've been focusing on for my dissertation for the past 4 to 5 years. So without that, let's get started. Actually, Sarah, is there a way I can see your screen before we start?
So I'm gonna start sharing. Do you want to? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
start sharing the PowerPoint. Sorry. So my PowerPoint's being a little finicky. So Sarah's going to be sharing the PowerPoint for me. Um, and yeah, we should be good to go.
It's getting going.
Perfect. Thank you guys for your patience with our technology
All
skills.
right. I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay, perfect. So my study is focused on sandbar sharks and it's focused in the Nantucket, Massachusetts area. If you're not familiar with that area, you will become oriented with it a little later on in my talk. But it is highlighted. Oh, yeah, thank you. It is highlighted in that red box up there on the coastline. Sandbar sharks are your typical looking shark. They are ranging from our coastline from Massachusetts all the way down to Brazil, and they're considered one genetic stock. So they're all interbreeding with each other. They're a coastal migratory warm water species. So they prefer their summers to be up north when the waters get warmer and their winters to be down south. And they're late to grow, they're slow growing and late to mature in life, which is pretty typical for most shark species. Sandbars reproduce at around 50, or they reach sexual maturity and can reproduce at around 15 years old. However, it does take them a long time to produce a litter, which is what we call a group of shark babies. And that can be about 11 months. And they produce about 15 at a time, anywhere from anywhere average from 9 to 15. And unfortunately, that just makes them a slow growing species when it comes to population wise. Next, please. So sandbar sharks were actually the preferred species in the commercial shark fishery for many, many years between the 80s and, well, actually from the 80s up, they were the preferred specimen because of their large their dorsal fin on the shark, which is specific to sandbar sharks. They have a very large dorsal fin when you look at their body size. This caused them to be overfished and overexploited, leading to 80% reduction in their stock, which ultimately caused the federal and state to decide to protect these species in 2008. Since that protection, we have seen some recent US stock rebounds. We didn't see them before that because of their slow growing and late to mature life cycle. Next, please. So currently, sandbar sharks are considered overfished, with overfishing not currently occurring. They have undergone 4 different stock assessments, so kind of 4 different population censuses of that stock on our coastline that ranges down to Brazil. And they're actually in a current stock assessment that started last year and is still ongoing right now. I'm not sure the current state of it from the last meeting that we had. In Massachusetts, they are targetable. However, you cannot retain them. So you can actively go out and fish for them, but you cannot legally keep that shark. You must release it. And there's also been a lack of Massachusetts data in these stock assessments. So there's been very limited research on sandbar sharks in Massachusetts, even though we know they come here. Next, please. This figure here on the right just shows the extent of sandbar shark's northern habitat range, and the box highlights our area specifically. So you can see we represent the northern extent of this species habitat range on our coastline. And this area has also been a shark habitat for centuries. This photo is from Nantucket. It's from the 1800s. I'd like to specify that the sharks in this photo are not sandbar sharks. They are sand tiger sharks, which we still have around here. But it just, I think, is a cool photo, and it also shows some of the history and the historic, um, or the fishery history of our islands and the sharks that have been here for a long, long time. I keep going to change my slide as like a reflex. Thank you. So there has been some work done here. It's been really, really limited. From 1989 to 2002, Greg Skomal did a research on sandbar sharks in the recreational fishery here. You can see this is a photo of Greg himself actually tagging a sandbar shark off Martha's Vineyard. I'm not sure the exact date that this photo was taken, but I do love the ripped jeans. So if you ever see Greg or hear talk, please ask him about this photo. That would make my day. And then on the right side, we see where he sampled. So we can see that he primarily sampled the Martha's Vineyard area and a little bit of the Cape, but he was the first person to collect sandbar shark data in our Massachusetts area and specifically in this study area that I have. Next, please. Additionally, I was part of this research that we just finished with some of my dissertation committee and collaborators, where we looked at the post-release recreational mortality of sandbar sharks caught in this local fishery. So over the years, we've noticed that there's been increase in the popularity and catches in this fishery. So people going out to the Cape and Islands and actively fishing for sandbar sharks from the coastline, catching them, releasing them. And we wanted to know how these animals were faring in that fishery. Were they swimming away and surviving? Were they swimming away and dying? What was happening to them? So you can actually go online and read this study. I'm happy to provide a link to it at the end if you'd like. But we basically found out that our sandbar sharks are pretty hardy and are mostly surviving this catch and release fishery. But it brought to attention that there's this really limited knowledge in this area where we have a species that may be rebounding and is also subject to local fisheries. Next, please. So my research was really driven by these factors, and I wanted to assess the sandbar shark population demographics and habitat use in the Nantucket Sound. And part of that was because this has been a historic habitat. There's been really lack of work done here in the past for a very important species. This species is still subject to local recreational fisheries, and we are seeing a potential population rebound in our area. So all of these things brought me to my research focuses, which, if you can go to the next slide, please, which are basically the who, what, when, wheres, and whys of sandbar sharks around Nantucket and in our local habitat. I look at their current demographics. I look at their presence and habitat use. I look at their residency and if that is influenced by certain abiotic factors. And then I look at why they are here. Do they prefer certain habitats and areas within our study area and potentially why? Next, thanks, perfect. So the way I do this is primarily with recreational fishing. I've been doing this with collaborators since 2019 through 2002. We conduct our fishing from boat and shore, and we fish mainly through June through September when the sandbar sharks are here. We've collected data from both the Cape Cod and Nantucket area, and every shark we tag, we externally tag with an identification tag from nymphs so that if we were to recapture that shark, we know exactly which individual it was, or if someone was out fishing and they capture that shark, they can actually take that information from that tag and relay that information to nymphs, and then nymphs gives us that information back. And beyond recreational fishing, I also use acoustic telemetry. So acoustic telemetry, if you want to go to the next slide, is kind of like an easy pass system. So I'm sure some of you guys here are familiar with our toll booth systems, and acoustic telemetry works the same way. I internally insert a transmitter into a sandbar shark, and the transmitters are programmed to last for 7 to 10 years. They have their own program number on each one, so I know which individual is tagged with which number. And that is then transmitted on a frequency that us humans cannot hear, but there are specific receiver and detection stations that we place in the water to log those shark detections of the sharks swimming by and the transmitters emitting. Um, this is a really helpful way to study species without interacting with their daily habitats. We call it passive monitoring. So we're just kind of stalking them and seeing what they're doing in their free time. And when we place these receiver array or these receivers, which are our detection stations, kind of our toll booths around the area, we can get a good sense of where they're moving and when they're moving to those places. So this figure on the right just shows my study area. And if you're not familiar with the Cape and Islands, there's an insert at the top of the figure for you to place yourself along our coastline. And then within the larger portion of the figure, these black dots represent our receiver stations. So those stations we have listening to our sharks. And these red areas just outline some reference points for you around Nantucket if you're not familiar with the island. Next slide, please. So this is an animation of how acoustic telemetry works. Our shark has the tag on or in their body, and it is pinging on a level that we cannot hear. And when that shark swims within a range of that receiver then logs that information. And it attaches that information with the date, the time, the tag code, and the receiver code. So when I have my array, I can say, shark A swam from this area to this area, back to this area, and hung out over here for a couple days, etc. Do you want to replay that just so everybody can get a good idea? So you can see he's out of range, not being detected, and when he's in range, that receiver will log it. Next, please. And this is, again, the same figure of our receiver array. We have about 42 receivers out there that we deploy annually from May through November. Our annual deployments vary by date that each receiver was deployed, but they're usually deployed about May through November, and we deploy them and then haul them in November. And beyond this network, we are part of shared networks that range from Maine to all the way through Texas. So that way, if one of my sharks swims into another institution's receiver array, let's say somewhere in New Jersey or South Carolina, I can get that information through that shared network. Next, please. Another tag that I put on these sharks is called an ADL, an accelerometer. This tag monitors triaxial acceleration. So that's both static and dynamic acceleration. So that basically means I can monitor your body position and how much you're moving. So if you're a human and you're standing up and just standing still, if you're on the ground rolling around, or if you're sprinting up a hill, I can monitor all of that. And this tag also monitors water temperature and depth. And we have this embedded in a float package that we sometimes also additionally put in a camera so we can get the shark's point of view. I also, when I put this tag on a shark, embed the shark, or also tag it with an acoustic transmitter so that I can get its local whereabouts while I'm also getting that Fitbit movement, if you kind of want to think of this as a Fitbit. And since sharks don't have lovely wrists for us to just put Fitbits on, we actually attach them to the dorsal fin. This tag does pop off the shark with a time deployed link, and then I do retrieve the tag to get the data back and can use it again on another fish. Next. So now the results, which are the fun stuff. I hope everybody's still with me because we have all the fun stuff to go over. So our demographics, when we go back to that first question that I'm asking, who's here? What are the size of the individuals we're seeing? How big are they? What sex ratio are we seeing? So overall, for the past 6 or 7 years, we have caught 276 sandbar sharks from the Cape and Nantucket area. Those individuals range from 113 to 190 centimeters fork length, which it's just a scientific way where we define a fish's length, but we are seeing individuals that are averaging around 150 centimeters. So that's going to be your typical size of a sandbar shark around here. Out of those 276 individuals, we do see significantly more juveniles. So we're not seeing newborn sharks. We're not seeing very young, small sharks. We're seeing larger kind of teenage individuals up to both mature sandbar female and male sharks. Next, please. When we break down our maturity, we do see significantly more females than males. And this could be a factor that is due to their sexual segregation after maturity. Sandbar sharks change their migration routes and their habitat use slightly between sexes once they've reached sexual segregation. So that could be indicative of that sort of behavior. Next. So back to those acoustic transmitters. Now we've talked about in general who's here and what ages are we seeing, what sizes are we seeing, what sex ratio. And now we're going to look at a bit of their habitat use. So it would be very expensive if I wanted to tag all of the sandbar sharks that I caught with acoustic transmitters. So I can only tag a subset. We have tagged 85 of them. 8 of them came from a collaborator in New Jersey prior to 2021 that had been migrating to the area before I started my research. And then 77 came from me tagging them around Nantucket and the Cape. And out of those 85 sharks, we have detected 83, which is, I like to say it's amazing because we have no control over where these sharks go. We don't have full detection coverage, so I can't tell you where they are at any given time. And our sharks could, example, swim away and never come back to the area. They could swim away and be predated upon. They could swim away, the tag could malfunction. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. So I'm very thrilled to see this really strong presence. Next, please. So when we look at our residency, so how long are these sharks staying in the Nantucket Sound and Cape and Islands area? On average, we see about 28 days, which is still a pretty good chunk of time. But the extent that they could stay or that they have stayed is up to 93 days. And that's usually through this June to October rate, which makes sense with their the October months, which makes sense with their warm water preferences. This figure here shows each shark identification number, which you don't really necessarily need to worry about, but each line is a different individual. And the black dots represent days they were detected or present in our array. The green X marks days that they were actually tagged, so we can't detect a shark before it was tagged. And I just wanted to focus on years 2022 through 25 to really focus on showing our return rates. So we have a really strong presence of individuals here, but we also see, if you want to go to the next slide, it's the same figure, but we also see kind of more clearly now that our individuals are coming back to our island every year, pretty much around the same time, and they're using this area extensively through those months, which I find very exciting again because they could just be here once and never come back, but for some reason they keep to be coming here annually, which I think is pretty similar to our summer crowd around Nantucket as well. If you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So this is a simple way to just kind of break down their habitat use. These dots again represent our receivers, so those listening stations. And I calculated a very simple receiver index, which is basically looking at the number of days these receivers detected our sharks over the amount of days they were actually monitoring for those sharks. Because we had annual variations in our deployment days and haul days, it was important for me to try to limit that bias a bit. And what I want you to focus on is basically the colors and sizes of these circles. I'll explain the numbers in a minute, but we see these larger and stronger colored circles around Nantucket. The numbers over the circles represent the individual amount of sandbar sharks that receiver detected, whereas the circle itself represents that index. And when we focus in on Nantucket, which if you go to the next slide, that'd be awesome. We can see that we have a really strong habitat use or activity of sandbar sharks around Great Point, specifically on both the west side and the east side, but the west side seems to have a huge sort of influx of activity of sandbar sharks when not only within the whole array, looking at the coast of the Cape compared to the island, but also within the Nantucket array itself. So if you go to the next slide, So when I wanted to basically look at how abiotics may factor their influence or their presence around Nantucket, I ran a simple binomial logistic regression, which looked at their daily presence and factored into water temperature and photo period. And photo period is basically the amount of daylight. And I chose the Great Point area to do this because that's where we were seeing the most activity from our sharks. We did find that water temperature and photo period were both significant in predicting and influencing sharks' presence with warmer waters and shorter photo period, which again makes sense with their warm water migratory behavior, but it's still important to note. And it's something I want you to just hold on to that water temperature fact. If you can just remember that in the future, I think my talk will make a lot more sense. Um, so if you go to the next slide, but don't play the video yet. This is pretty cool, and this is where I think it gets really interesting. So we can see with our habitat use data from the acoustic transmitters, those easy pass systems, that sandbar sharks really like this Great Point area. And if anybody's fished off Nantucket or around the Cape and they've had the experience to fish off Great Point and or just go there in the middle of July or August, even mid-September, you will most likely see many sandbar sharks cruising the coastline, or you may mistake them for seals because they are that close to shore and they do have a similar black blobby shape in the water. If you want to trick, if they don't come up for air at all, they're most likely not a seal. That's been something that's been quite helpful for some people to help realize. But we do have some of these deployments where we have a camera on that Fitbit tag. So we can record some personal or point of view from a sandbar shark. And we have to be tricky because we want to find days where we have wonderful weather. And these videos represent probably the best water quality we have seen. But if you want to play them, Sarah, we can see some pretty cool interactions here. So this video is the frame rate's a little bit sped up, but what you see is one sandbar shark's head moving back and forth. That's its point of view. The tag is oriented right here. And you can play it again. And a lot of other sandbar sharks swimming around that shark. This is a wide angle video, so these individuals are getting very close. And we see that they're up in the middle of the water column and they're doing this kind of loose schooling behavior. Um, and then you can play the next one if you want. So this is a different individual that we tagged on a different day, different year, that again had many social or sort of behavioral interactions with other individual sandbar sharks. They're basically slamming into each other. I feel like it's just traffic and chaos. Again, it's wide angle, so these individuals are getting very close to one another. There's a cool little sequence coming up where they almost run into each other. It's kind of like, do you even know where you're going? Um, but it gave us a lot of insight into some of the behavior that we can't see. So we can see a lot of these sandbar sharks really close to shore and shallow. We had this insight that they're all hanging around here. We can catch a bunch right there, but we can't always see what they're doing in the depths. And then again, with that Fitbit, I'm actually able to track their physical movements throughout this. So it's giving me both energy dynamics, acceleration dynamics, and this social behavior. But if you want to go to the next slide, the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy was really nice to share this drone footage with me. So I want to thank them. They captured this off Great Point in July 3 years ago, almost now. And all those black blobs you can see kind of darting around are sandbar sharks. That bigger, more pancakey blob in the middle is a rough-tailed stingray, which we see there a lot. But I mean, you can try to count how many individuals that is. That's a lot of different sandbar sharks. And that's some of the visuals we get when we're close to shore or driving along on our boat. But the videos before that were some of those point of view videos that can give us a whole nother insight into what these fish are doing and why. So that brings us to, thank you. That brings me to my next point, which is why Great Point. Why do we see this influx of activity and this larger kind of aggregational evidence of sandbar sharks in that area? Um, Next, please. So those Fitbit tags have been pretty helpful in trying to figure that out. We've been deploying them on sandbar sharks in the Great Point area, and we've collected many hours of data looking at both their triaxial static position, dynamic movement, water temperature, and depth use, and then some of that video behavior. What I want to highlight here is the dive profiles of some of the individuals. We see this really exaggerated depth use between the surface and 0 down to almost 15 meters, 10 meters, pretty consistently throughout their deployments of these accelerometers. So these could be over, the deployments could vary in time length, but these are over hours. Um, any shark that doesn't swim will sink. That's just the way their body physics work. And for a lot of species, they need to swim to be able to breathe. They cannot actively pump water over their gills. And that is sandbar sharks. So they need to be swimming to breathe. So when we see this yo-yo behavior, what is happening is actually the shark is swimming up in the water column and then it stops swimming and just glides down. It's kind of like if you're biking up a hill and you're gliding down. Um, and if you want to go to the next slide, we see this is really popular or a very common behavior with a lot of these different sandbar sharks around Great Point. These scales are on meters, so I want you to understand it's not 0 to 15 feet. It's a larger scale than that. And you can see this kind of, again, really exaggerated yo-yo diving behavior. And if you want to go to the next slide, I think, well, we think that it's due to basically energy conservation. So one of the ways we can quantify the amount of energy you're exporting or you're putting into something is by looking at your overall dynamic body acceleration, so your ODBA. So if I were to look at you sitting on the couch, your ODBA would be incredibly low. You're not moving, you're not exerting that much energy. If you were walking, it would be a little bit higher. And if you're sprinting, it would be very high because you're exerting all of this energy. Um, and this figure in front of us is showing water depth that one of our sharks is using and her related ODBA to that. And it's over a much smaller time scale. It's over only about 25 minutes, just so I can zoom in to really show you guys what's happening. The blue represents a decrease in depth or a decrease in ODBA, and the red represents an increase in depth or an increase in ODBA. And what we see is when she's descending in the water column, gliding down, her ODBA is actually decreasing. So she's not using as much energy compared to the next slide, where she's actually, when she's swimming up into the water column, her ODBA is increasing. So she's actively using more energy. Again, to just kind of show that when they're gliding down, they're able to conserve energy. And if you're a fish that has to swim your whole life, conserving energy is a very important thing that you want to take into account. So with our next slide, what this figure is showing is our water depth around Nantucket. And what I want you to focus on is the color variations. We see these little pockets of this blue water in here, and that represents much deeper water than this orangey yellow area. And we can see along the Cape Cod shoreline, it's pretty shallow and it's pretty shallow for a good way out into the middle of the sound. Same around Martha's Vineyard, oops, and same around Nantucket on the west side of the island. However, if we focus in on Nantucket, if you go to the next slide, we can see that right next to Great Point, so right on the west side of Great Point, we have a very shallow little nip, like sliver of water, and then it immediately goes down to much deeper water. This figure again is in meters, so please keep that in mind. And when I overlay or compare that to these dive profiles, we can see our sandbar sharks are immediately in shallow water where we're tagging them, and then immediately accessing this deeper water. Next slide, please. Then, when I also overlay that information with tidal current movement, so the amount of water moving through an area or the scale of the tidal force, we can see on the left side, these figures were taken from other sources, but that this shows the map of our tidal excursion scale. The scale is a little bit reversed here, where the blue now represents very low quantities or low movement of movement of water, and the red represents very high movement of water. Um, and we see this really big kind of blue area around Great Point and this big high red area also around Martha's Vineyard and the other side of our island, on both sides of our islands, which are representing a lot of water movement. And so even though there is some depth above Martha's Vineyard, there's such aggressive water movement that I think that it is deterring sharks from going there. And if we look at our figure on the right, where it's more focused in on Nantucket, we can just see, again, this light blue eddy around the northern portion of our island and western side of Great Point. And what it's representing is, again, the force of water movement. So let's say you're a shark that has to swim to breathe. You're going to choose areas where maybe you don't have to fight against such extreme tidal currents. Deciding where you go is very important for your survival, for your ability to find prey, for your ability to evade predators. So if you don't want to necessarily be pushed in the motion that this extreme tidal current is pushing you, you may avoid that area to again conserve energy. You wouldn't necessarily want us to walk uphill into the wind all day if you could walk on a flat, calm area. So if you go to the next slide, I think all in all that part of the reason our sandbar sharks are really driven to this Nantucket and Great Point area is kind of a perfect storm of events where we have energy conservation, where they're able to go into this deep water, ability to do that yo-yo behavior where they can glide and then conserve some of that energy, which is very important, again, if you're swimming every moment of your life. They can also access the shallow water, which is slightly warmer than the deeper water, which would be colder, to provide some sort of thermoregulation. Sharks cannot do that naturally on their own, so this is a way they can kind of help regulate that. And then they can avoid predators in the shallow water, again, be very close to deep water to then conserve energy from potential exertion of avoiding that predator. There are larger predators of sandbar sharks in the area. Big sand tiger sharks will eat them. Big dusky sharks and great white sharks will also predate upon them. Additionally, there's a factor of safety in numbers. These sandbar sharks aren't necessarily tightly schooling together all the time, but the presence of other individuals just reduces the ratio of you being the one to be plucked out of the school. And there is a lot of prey present in Great Point, so it's not necessarily like they can't find food there. So it's a little perfect little blender of factors that I think really make this area attractive to sandbar sharks. So if everybody's still with me, I'll go over some conclusions. I know it's a Monday, 5:30. So don't worry, we're almost done. But so all in all, what all this data, you kind of take all of it and boil it down and kind of look at some of these bigger facts or bigger conclusions that it's saying is that juveniles and adult sandbar sharks show a very strong annual dependency on this habitat throughout the season and over multiple years. That leads me to believe that the area very it provides a lot of benefits, and there are certain areas within our study area that provide benefit sustaining aggregations, which we've seen around Great Point. We also remember that water temperature is influencing their presence, which is really important when we think about our next factor. So we've kind of established that Nantucket is an important area for them. They're annually using it, and it has some really great combination of benefits that drives them to come back here year after year. But that being, or yeah, sorry, and then we'll go back into water temperature afterwards. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. So the importance of this study beyond just improving our local biodiversity information is also mapping sandbar shark habitats in the larger coastline area. So an EFH is an essential fish habitat, and it's pretty much self-explanatory. It's an area that's essential for certain fish species. They differ per species, But this map here is showing on EFHs for sandbar sharks represented in the yellow to orange. And we can see that the Nantucket Sound and area is mostly not included in the sandbar shark EFH. That does not mean that tomorrow it's going to be included, but this data is helpful in any sort of potential change in that EFH, and for showing that this area could be a potential for sandbar sharks to be considered an EFH in their total habitat. There's also a lot of importance with the aggregation drivers. Studying aggregation drivers is important to understand because it's clearly showing that there's a lot of benefits in this area and that all these benefits are important to the species. So, in understanding how those benefits are important can help identify what the aggregation drivers are. And that can be then also carried over to other areas where there are stronger aggregations of similar species, the same species, or different life groups within the species. But that being said, thank you, there are threats. So with aggregations come vulnerability. Many individuals can be subject to threats at once, whether it's overfishing problems, predation problems, habitat destruction, or things like warm water or habitat change, and warm water influence. So as we remember, sandbar sharks are in their presence in our areas influenced by warm water. And we do see the Gulf of Maine is increasingly, well, their temperature is increasing over annually if at an increase an exponential rate to the point where they are, if they're not the top body of water, they're one of the top bodies of water that is increasing annually within our globe at the highest rate. So if you go to the next slide, we can actually see that the Gulf of Maine feeds right into our Nantucket area. We've already seen a lot of biodiversity changes within the Gulf of Maine from this warming water, but we will potentially see a lot of changes coming to our Nantucket area with warm water species potentially staying longer or being able to venture further north into areas they were not. So this data will help enable future comparisons and can potentially enable past comparisons, if there were many, to basically our local biodiversity on sandbar sharks movement and then the cascading effects that that can have within other food webs. So with that, I would like to thank a lot of people. There's too many people to go through and thank, but this has been a giant collaboration and it has not been a one-person project. It's been a 1,000-person project, and it wouldn't have been done with any of these people and many more people listed. So I'd really like to thank everybody for the help and the effort to make this research possible. It's been a dream come true to be able to do it. And yeah, I'd love for any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Caroline. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see the chat because I can't see the chat when you're sharing is one thing I realized. So, all right. So first of all, thank you so much for that great talk. I have some notes, but I wanted to remind everyone I have some Q&As here, and I have if you have questions or if you want to ask anything, please put it in the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to some questions. I'm going to read out the questions so that they're part of the recording. And let's see. So lots of people are saying they really like to hear more about sandbar sharks. They appreciate what you're saying. What is your favorite memory to take back during this study? I love those kind of questions. We ask, when I'm sure, I mean, I'm not going to speak for you, but I'm sure your goals and your ideas have changed over the course of this work because you've been working on this since 2019. So what are some of your favorite field stories maybe that you'd love to share from this work?
Oh man. Oh man, there's so many. Okay, I'll share like three really quick ones. One was last summer, we were fishing on the beach. I love fishing on the boat. I'm not a total beach shark fishermen, but sometimes you have to do it for the research. And there were some kids around, and one of my friends was fishing with me, and she was their school teacher. And one of the little girls, she had to be about 8 years old, came over and helped us reel in the fish. And there's this photo of her just yanking with all her might back on the fishing rod and sitting in the background watching us tag. And after it happened, she came up to my friend and said, I want to do that when I'm older. How do I get to do that? And it was just so sweet. And it's like my favorite photo ever because, my friend's holding the rod and she's just pulling with all her little might. And it was such little might, but she put so much force into it. So it's a lot of those moments where a, a lot just local people get involved and they realize the science behind it. It's not just for the fish or the moment or the photo. It's really trying to do that. In my thank you slide, there's a photo of my dog who comes a lot out with me to either tag from the beach or collect tags that have been washed up, which, they're supposed to come off the shark. And I volunteer as a foster for our local animal shelter where my dog is from. And 2 summers ago, we were fostering a dog, and we had a local citizen find a tag. We went to go get it from the citizen, and I brought the foster dog with me. And long story short, they ended up adopting that dog, and he now summers on Nantucket and winters somewhere in New England. And it was just like an amazing little silver lining of something that I was like, oh, I'm just, getting the dog socialized and out. And they were like, we love this dog. I was like, well, he's up for adoption. So that was pretty special. Um, and then just some other cool things with fishing where my buddy recaptured one of the sharks I tagged that's been coming here every year since I tagged her, probably since before I tagged her. And he recaptured her 2 years later, only a mile away, which was pretty nifty. So just I could
Cool.
go on all day about those.
We have a question in the chat. How do you think the recent removal of restrictions on commercial fishing on the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument will impact sandbar sharks? And while you answer that, I'm going to let my dog out. I'll be right back.
Okay. That's a great question. I personally have never fished in the canyons. I would absolutely love to. Um, So I don't actually have any great data on sandbar shark movements from the canyons. I think that it's hard sometimes to predict the cascading effects that different fisheries management's implications will have. But I don't think I can really speak to anything from the canyons affecting Nantucket, if that makes sense. But actually, Sarah, can you reread the question?
Yeah, it was just, more about how you think the recent removal of any restrictions in that area that just came out about over the weekend, if they would impact sandbar sharks. Not necessarily Nantucket, but broadly, do you think releasing or removing those restrictions would have any impact?
Yeah, I mean, they could, but I think honestly, I would have to sit down and kind of lay out the factors in that before I give a bold statement on that. And I would feel a little bit better having done a little more background work in the canyon specifically than just going kind of freeballing a statement where I don't have too much specific data on that.
So I'll ask maybe a related question. So I'm a land ecologist, and so when I learn about marine things, it's like such a new area. And oftentimes we think of certain species, maybe there's a signature species, right? Like if we protect some very big charismatic species, it has a cascading effect on the other species in that habitat. And so my question to you is more about sandbar sharks. Like the more you learn about sandbar sharks and their behavior, obviously it's very species specific, but like the things you were finding out about Great Point and the habitat availability and the warm water, do you think that has can you kind of translate or transfer some of that knowledge to other species in that area?
Yeah, I think that we're actually going to start seeing other warm water shark species coming up here. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing spinners and black tips coming up. Their extent has been creeping further and further. Bull sharks have actually been known to extend their range into North Carolina now with warming water temperatures. So I don't think I don't think it's something where I can say next year we're going to have X species arrive, but I don't see it being out of the realm in our future of having some of these warm water species that are we're not used to seeing come up here. At first, it may be a little bit of a blip here and there, but then it might be start becoming more routine. We also might be seeing sandbar sharks stay for longer, which could have different cascading effects in our prey situation as well. And then eventually we could see them move further north, and that would be very interesting. I'm personally very interested in that because of the kind of the white shark domain in the Chatham and Cape
Mhm.
area, because they are prey to white sharks and they don't routinely like to go there, which I don't blame them for. Um, and then the water quality and water temperature movement is very different, very far offshore than it is in the area of like the Sound around Nantucket. The Sound is a very different water body than offshore where the canyons are like 50 to 100 miles offshore. So yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Um, so we have a question from Steve. Steve, first of all, I really liked your talk, but also he's an island local, and he said this past summer he caught many sandbar sharks from July to September, and he's wondering if there's any opportunity to do some tagging or help out with data collection.
That's a wonderful question. I'm always happy to hear people are interested, so thank you. And thank you for saying that about the talk. That's something that is kind of like I'd be happy to do, but I don't necessarily promote. People can just come fishing with me all the time. It's a little bit more regulated in the sense of where we go and when we go, and what data we're collecting. It's not necessarily like we're just going out fishing today. It's like, oh, we have to go here and do this. And even if we don't catch a fish, we still have to stay there for X amount of time. So definitely please reach out to me. I think you can get my email contact through this link. And if not, I'm happy to share it because, I'm always happy to connect and chat and talk about what's actually realistic for fishing because I love help. I just want to be realistic about going about it.
Great, thank you. I have a follow-up question that's sort of related to, what are your next steps? I know this has been part of your dissertation research, and what do you hope to accomplish this summer and like kind of short and longer term?
Yeah, I would, I'm hoping to finish my dissertation this year. I'll be planning to graduate in December, which is very exciting, and I will have three different th chapters or three different data chapters with a five-chapter dissertation, and it's all focused on sandbar sharks around Nantucket. But kind of my dream for this was not just sandbar sharks. What I really think is missing is a lot of fish biodiversity research and ecology research around Nantucket. We focus a lot on shellfish and water quality and some of those smaller species. Um, and the island's history is based off fishing and whaling. So I think we're kind of missing this really large opportunity to continue this receiver array. It complements a lot of the other work that the New England Aquarium is doing with research with sea turtles, with false albacore, a lot of the other fisheries work we do with black sea bass, tautog, things like that. So this is really just sandbars are just kind of an example of what we can do around here. They're a very important example. They're kind of a canary in the coal mine. But my dream would be able to continue this research and expand it to be able to answer questions on other species and, for example, be able to better answer those questions on what happens if we do see sandbar sharks staying here for 5 months instead of the X amount, or like 3 months or something like that. Or we do see them going up into Chatham. Is that going to change white sharks' prey preference? Are they going to go for sandbars instead of seals now? There's just as one of my collaborators says, you go down one rabbit hole and then you find there are a bunch more rabbit holes to keep going down. So I think there's endless opportunities here, and I would be beyond thrilled to continue the research here in any sort of fisheries ecology way. So that's something I'm very interested in the future and would be more than happy to talk to anybody about.
That's awesome. I think that's really exciting. I mean, when you showed the maps of the arrays of like where all the the I say listening devices, but where all the track or the receivers are. Yeah, thinking through what other species we could put tag, I say we, like the big science we could be putting tags on. And I'm sure, as you alluded to, how the receivers in other areas pick up your sharks. What are some of the other species or research tags that maybe your array has picked up? I'd be
Yeah,
interested to hear that.
I'm actually excited because we have a publication on that's been out for a couple years, and it's on sea turtles that we have rehabbed at the New England Aquarium that we've released, and we put acoustic transmitters on them. A collaborator in our lab does that, and we have detected them on our array off the South Shore. Additionally, we have another publication coming out, if not this week, that this next month, about false albacore. So everybody
Cool.
loves to everybody loves to go fishing for false albacore, and there's actually been really no regulations for them or any kind of fishery data for them across our entire coastline, all the way down to Florida. So my research collaborators and I are on a paper that's coming out talking about their post-release mortality from recreational fishing using acoustic transmitters, and our study array is involved in that paper. So our array is complementing multiple research projects that we're doing. In the aquarium, we also have a project in Boston Harbor on sand tiger sharks. That's an important area for juveniles. And we do catch the adults over on Nantucket, which is a different story, but sand tiger sharks were heavily overfished, and that's related to more their reproduction. And they have an even slower life pop cycle than sandbar sharks. So they're even more highly vulnerable to that. So those are just three examples right now that two are in the process of, well, one's published, one's going to be published any day, and the next is not published yet, but is in the process of still collecting data. So I think the opportunities are endless. We also detect sharks that are white sharks tagged by Greg Scommel and the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. We're not legally allowed to share data that's not our own tag,
Hmm.
and same with another entity that detects my sandbar shark. It's just part of the agreement, the data agreement that we all joined. But they do share that data publicly, and you can go onto their Sharktivity app and their website, and they are given any information of a white shark around our area, as well as other researchers who study striped bass. So Massachusetts DMF has a huge striped bass study. Um, and then again, same for anybody who's doing dusky work, anybody who's tagging, basically any animal that's tagged on that frequency would show up on our receiver array if they came in the area. Um, so we have detected a lot of other bony fish as well too. And again, like I can't just go tell you every individual because I'm not trying to break our.
No, no. No, that's great. I mean, that honestly, hearing that so many more are already to the level, you've collected enough data to the level of publication is way more than I even guessed. So that's so exciting. And as you said, with our rich maritime history, it's so important to have more and more fisheries data and localized fisheries data. The state does a great job. Um, for especially, certain commercial and recreational fish, but just understanding more about our specific area is so important. We have another question because you mentioned the sand tiger sharks. Someone asked, what's the difference between a sand tiger shark and sandbar sharks? I know sometimes common names get used for multiple species, so can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so first of all, the difference is it's completely different species. It's like saying a tuna fish versus a striped bass. They're just both sharks. They both have sand in their common name, which makes them seem similar, but they're not related. They're closer relative. The sandbar shark is more closely related to a dusky shark than it is a sand tiger shark. Um, so they're very different. Sand tigers get to be much larger, and they only ever have two babies per reproductive cycle. They have a different range, they have different habitat preferences and different prey preferences. Um, where sandbars are, yeah, they're just all different. I could go into a lot of the different examples, but it's kind of like that is a pigeon versus a mourning dove. So they might be similar seeming, but they're not closely related. And then common names. The problem with common names is, so there's a universal language for every scientist, and that's their Latin name. So Carcharodontis plumbeus is a sandbar shark. If I were to speak to anyone in the scientific community who studies sharks, no matter what language they said, and I said Carcharodontis plumbeus, we all know we're talking about the same species. If I said sandbar shark, they might be thinking I'm talking about a sand tiger shark, which is Carcharias taurus in its scientific name, or maybe a smooth dogfish, which is Mustela canis. So that's common name is what your kind of area calls the shark. Some people around Nantucket call a sandbar a brown shark. Some people call them a sand shark. Some people call them a sandbar shark. Some people call them a dogfish. So it can become very confusing when you're talking to someone and you think you're talking about the same animal, but you're not. Um, for example, a redfish in California is very different than a redfish in South Carolina.
Mhm.
So that the sand portion of sand tiger and sandbar can trip people up by thinking they're closely related, but they're not. And it's a larger issue with common names and kind of the confusion of what you're talking about. But then again, not everyone's, like if I had a conversation with Sarah and she started listing all the scientific plant names to me, I'd be probably a little bit lost.
I was just gonna say we have the same problem with plants. I mean, it's
Yeah,
only
exactly.
the American Ornithological Union dictates common names as well as scientific names. So, but there's fewer birds and there's more fish and there's more plants. So,
And for example, like
uh,
lady slippers, there are a lot of different types of lady slippers. So,
yes. I have two more questions. We're gonna wrap up because it's just six, but I mean, I couldn't let you go without asking about Sharkira.
no,
I love that you named the sharks, or someone named the sharks, and Sharkira was my favorite. That came
I
up.
asked my neighbor, I said, I need more name ideas. I got to show him this now. And I said, I need more name ideas. And he said Sharkira, and the other one was Megalodonna. So,
Oh, Megalodonna, I missed that.
and we have my friend's son named one Sharky Pants. We have Plop. And then we have some like, more historical, cooler ones, but we have Sparkle. I let the kids name them and anyone who
Yeah,
chats with me because like it's fun. And then I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm gonna name this one Basil or Oregano. So but Sharkira was, yeah, I was thinking shack, but it's shark.
that's inspired. I mean, we joke that we're not supposed to anthropomorphize our study subjects, but you also have to identify them, and so why not Sharkira?
Well,
Um,
also for this talk, I was like, we can put in Sharkira, but maybe for a conference, we'll put it back to like individual 1077 or something.
I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs are banging on the door. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. There's a few more questions if you want to look at the chat, but I am going to wrap it up only because it's already 6 o'clock. So I'm going to first off stop recording. Um,